Walk into almost any home in Japan and look behind the television, and you'll find something most American homes don't have. A power strip with a row of individual switches, one for every device plugged into it, and every single one of them actually gets used. Not as decoration, not as an unused feature buried in a manual somewhere. Used, every single night, as a habit as automatic as locking the front door. Before we continue, let me mention one thing. Many of the Japanese methods I share in these videos have been collected into a practical guide over at the Japanese Home Manual. If you'd like to explore them in more detail, you'll find it there. That's all. Now, let's get back to today's method. The habit has a name in Japanese, Taiki Denryoku, standby power, sometimes called phantom load in English language energy circles. And it refers to something almost nobody thinks about because it's invisible by design. Your television isn't off when it's off. Your microwave's clock is still lit at 2 in the morning. Your game console, your cable box, your phone charger left plugged into the wall with nothing attached to it. All of them are quietly drawing a small trickle of electricity around the clock, waiting for a remote control signal or simply running a clock display, whether you're using them or not. Individually, none of it looks like much. A phone charger sitting empty in an outlet might draw a fraction of a watt. A cable box waiting for a signal might draw 10 or 15 watts continuously, 24 hours a day, every day of the year, whether you watch a single show or not. That's the part that catches people off guard once they actually see the number. A device drawing that kind of standby power for a full year adds up to real, measurable electricity, even though it never once did the job you bought it for during most of those hours. This isn't a fringe theory or a guess. Standby power has been studied seriously by energy researchers for decades, and the consistent finding, across multiple countries and multiple studies, is that it typically accounts for somewhere between 3 and 10% of a household's total electricity use. Higher in homes with more electronics, lower in homes with fewer. In Japan specifically, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry runs a program called Top Runner, which sets efficiency benchmarks that specifically include standby power requirements for manufacturers, precisely because the government took the cumulative effect seriously enough to regulate it at the design stage. That's not a marketing claim. That's a national energy policy built around a number most homeowners have never heard of. Here's where the $7 device comes in, and I want to be upfront about exactly what it is before we go any further, because half the value of this video is being honest about what a $7 fix can and can't do. It's not a secret patent, it's not a suppressed piece of Tesla-era technology, and it's not going to cut your bill in half. It's a switched power strip, sometimes sold in Japan as a Setsuden tap, literally a power-saving tap. A power strip with an individual toggle switch for each outlet, letting you cut power completely to a device instead of leaving it in standby. That's the entire invention. No moving parts beyond a switch. No chemistry, no physics that hasn't been understood since power strips existed at all. What makes it worth an entire video isn't the device itself, it's the habit built around it, and how differently Japanese households have used that habit compared to almost everywhere else. The reason this matters more than it sounds like it should comes down to a detail most people miss about standby power specifically. Unlike almost every other form of electricity waste in a home, it's completely invisible and completely constant. Leaving a light on in an empty room is wasteful, but at least you can see the light and remember to turn it off. Standby power draws silently, all day and all night, from devices that give you no visual or physical reminder that they're doing it. Your cable box doesn't flicker to remind you it's been idle for 6 hours. Your phone charger doesn't hum when it's drawing power with nothing plugged into it. The waste is real, but it's engineered, not maliciously, just by design, to be something you never actually notice, which is exactly why it survives in nearly every home on Earth despite being one of the easiest categories of electricity waste to actually fix. Over the rest of this video, we're going to walk through exactly how to find where your own standby power is hiding, what a switched power strip actually costs, and how to use one correctly, and, just as importantly, what this trick genuinely will and won't do to your electric bill. Because a technique that's honestly described as worth doing is a lot more useful to you than one dressed up as something it isn't. There's a cultural piece behind why this habit took root so firmly in Japan specifically, and it's worth understanding before we get into the mechanics. Because it's the difference between a gimmick and a genuine tradition. Japan has almost no domestic oil, gas, or coal reserves of its own, importing the overwhelming majority of the fuel that keeps its economy and its electrical grid running. Every energy shock the country has lived through, the oil crises of the 1970s, the aftermath of the 2011 earthquake, and the Fukushima disaster that followed, when huge parts of the country faced rolling blackouts and everyone was asked to conserve, has reinforced the same lesson at a national scale. Electricity is not something to take for granted, and small, consistent habits matter because they add up across millions of households at once. Setsuden, meaning electricity saving, became a genuine cultural phrase during and after 2011, not a marketing slogan, and the switched power strip is one of the smallest, most ordinary artifacts of that mindset. Cheap enough that almost nobody thinks twice about buying one, and habitual enough that using it barely registers as effort once it's part of a household's routine. That's really the entire premise of today's video. Not a hidden secret, not a suppressed technology, just a small, cheap, boring device that solves a real, well-documented problem, used consistently enough by an entire country that it stopped being a trick and just became how people there run a household. Let's find out exactly how much of that problem is sitting in your own home right now. It's worth setting one more honest expectation before we get into the mechanics, because it's the single most important sentence in this entire video. Standby power typically makes up 3 to 10% of a home's total electricity use, and a switched power strip, used consistently across the devices that actually draw meaningful standby power, addresses a meaningful chunk of that. Not all of it, and definitely not a reduction anywhere near 50% of your total bill. If a video promises you that a $7 gadget will cut your electric bill in half, that's not a hidden trick being kept from you by a shadowy utility conspiracy. It's simply not how electricity billing works, and anyone telling you otherwise is asking you to believe something that doesn't survive contact with a kilowatt-hour meter. What this video is offering instead is smaller and more honest. A real, measurable reduction in one specific, well-documented category of waste for the cost of a power strip and about 20 minutes of your evening. That's the honest premise this whole build rests on, and it's a better foundation than a dramatic number ever would be, because it's the version that still holds up 3 months from now when you check your actual bill against what this video promised you. Let's find where your own standby power is actually hiding, because it's not evenly distributed across your home. A handful of devices usually account for the majority of it, and finding those handful is most of the work. The biggest offenders, consistently, across nearly every study on this topic, fall into a few predictable categories. Anything with a remote control is high on the list, because the receiver that listens for that remote signal has to stay powered around the clock. Televisions, cable and satellite boxes, sound bars, and streaming devices. Anything with an external power brick, the black box partway down a charging cable, draws a small standby load simply by being plugged in, whether or not it's connected to the device it charges. Game consoles left in a quick start or instant on mode are often the single worst offender in a home with one, since that convenience feature is specifically designed to keep the console in a semi-active, power-drawing state rather than fully off. and older desktop computers, printers, and microwaves with an always-lit clock display round out the usual list. You don't need expensive equipment to find out how much your own devices are actually drawing. A basic plug-in watt meter, the kind that sits between an outlet and a device and displays real-time and cumulative power use, costs somewhere between $10 and $20 and pays for itself in the information alone. Plug it in behind your television setup, your game console, or your home office equipment for a day, and you'll get an honest number instead of a guess. If you don't want to buy one, most utility companies and public libraries in the US now loan them out for free specifically for this purpose, which is worth checking before you spend anything at all. Once you know where the standby draw is concentrated, the fix is almost embarrassingly simple. A switched power strip, the $7 device this whole video is about. Unlike a standard power strip, which is really just a multi-outlet extension cord with one master switch at best, a proper switched strip gives each outlet its own individual toggle, so you can cut power completely to your cable box while leaving your Wi-Fi router running, or kill your gaming setup entirely while leaving your phone charger active. That individual control is the entire point. A full study-supported reduction in standby waste depends on actually cutting power to the right devices at the right time, not just flipping one master switch that turns everything off at once, which often includes things you didn't mean to turn off, like a router you actually needed running overnight. Setting this up takes about the same 20 minutes regardless of how many rooms you're doing it in. Group your entertainment center devices, television, cable box, soundbar, game console, onto one switched strip, and get in the habit of switching that group off completely when you leave the room for the night, not just turning the television itself off with the remote. Do the same in a home office, grouping a monitor, a printer, and any charging equipment onto a second strip, switched off at the end of the workday, rather than left idling through every evening and weekend it isn't being used. Kitchen counters are worth a third strip if you've got a coffee maker with a clock display, a toaster oven, or anything else with an always-on digital readout sitting unused for most of the day. There's one important exception worth naming clearly, because getting this wrong is the most common mistake people make with switched strips, and it can cause real inconvenience rather than just a wasted trip to the store. Some devices are genuinely meant to stay on continuously and shouldn't go on a switched strip at all. Your home Wi-Fi router and modem, for one, since cutting power to those repeatedly can cause connectivity issues and generally isn't where the meaningful savings are anyway, given how little a modern router actually draws. DVRs recording scheduled programs, home security systems, and anything backing up data on a schedule fall into the same category. The rule of thumb is straightforward. If a device needs to be doing its job while you're not in the room or not paying attention to it, it doesn't belong on a switched strip. This trick is for devices sitting idle, waiting for you, not for devices actively doing something useful in the background. It's also worth being honest about one more nuance, because it's the kind of detail that separates a technically accurate video from a merely persuasive one. Not every standby load is equally worth chasing. A phone charger left in the wall with nothing attached to it draws a genuinely tiny amount of power, often measured in fractions of a watt with modern chargers. Worth doing out of habit, but not where your real savings live. A cable box or an older game console left in standby mode, by contrast, can draw 10 to 25 watts continuously, all day, every day, which over a full year adds up to real, measurable electricity, often more than some appliances you actually use regularly. Spend your effort on the handful of devices with a genuinely meaningful draw, found with that $10 watt meter, rather than treating every outlet in your house as equally urgent. That's the difference between a habit you'll actually keep and a chore that burns out after 2 weeks. Cost-wise, this entire setup runs about what the title promised. A basic switched power strip typically costs between $7 and $15, depending on the number of outlets and the brand. And a single strip is usually enough to cover one cluster of devices: an entertainment center, a home office, a kitchen counter. Most homes need 2 or 3 strips total to cover the areas where standby draw actually concentrates, putting the full project, watt meter included, comfortably under $50 for a typical household, done once, requiring nothing further beyond flipping a switch on your way out of the room from then on. There's also a slightly more advanced version of this worth mentioning for anyone who wants to go a step further without adding real cost. Smart plugs, outlets that connect to your home Wi-Fi and can be scheduled or controlled from your phone, do essentially the same job as a switched strip, but automate the habit instead of relying on you to remember it. A single smart plug typically costs $10 to $15, more than a basic switched strip outlet for outlet, but for a device you consistently forget to switch off manually, an automated schedule closes that gap. This isn't necessary for most households, and it adds a small amount of its own standby draw simply to stay connected to your network, which is worth acknowledging rather than glossing over. But for 1 or 2 stubborn devices in a household where the manual habit isn't sticking, it's a reasonable middle ground between doing nothing and doing everything by hand. The habit itself is really the last piece of this build, and it matters more than the hardware. A switched power strip sitting unused, with every outlet left permanently on, saves you exactly nothing. It's just an extension cord with extra buttons at that point. The entire value comes from actually using the switches, consistently, the way a Japanese household treats it. Part of leaving a room for the night, not a special project you remember to do once a month. Put the strip somewhere you'll actually see it and reach it easily, not tucked behind furniture, where flipping the switch becomes its own small chore, and the habit tends to stick within the first couple of weeks, the same way any new routine does once it stops requiring conscious effort. In the final part, we'll walk through realistic numbers for what this actually saves on a typical bill, how to verify it's working in your own home rather than just assuming, and why this modest, honest fix has stayed part of ordinary Japanese household life for decades, while flashier, more dramatic claims about electricity savings tend to disappear within a year or two of showing up online. One last practical note before we get to the numbers. Label your strips if you're covering more than one area of the house. A quick strip of masking tape and a marker next to each switch, TV cable, game console, printer, sounds unnecessary until you're standing in front of a strip with 6 switches at 11 at night trying to remember which one kills the router you actually need running. It's a 30-second step that prevents the single most common reason people abandon this habit after the first week. Let's put real numbers on this, because cut standby waste doesn't mean anything until you can see what it looks like on an actual bill. Take a fairly typical home with a television, cable box, soundbar, and game console in the living room, a desktop computer and printer in a home office, and the usual assortment of phone chargers and small kitchen appliances scattered around. Measured studies of homes with a similar device mix commonly find combined standby draw somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 watts, continuously, 24 hours a day. That sounds small until you run the math across a full year. 100 watts running around the clock adds up to roughly 876 kilowatt hours annually, and at a typical US residential rate of somewhere around 15 cents per kilowatt hour, that's in the neighborhood of $130 a year, spent on electricity that never once did the job any of those devices were bought to do. Not every household will find a number that large. A home with fewer electronics or newer, more efficient devices built to the stricter standby standards that have become more common over the past decade will find less. And realistically, a switch strip doesn't eliminate standby draw entirely, since some devices genuinely need to stay powered and won't go on the strip at all, as we covered in the last part. A reasonable, honest expectation for most households actually using the switches consistently is somewhere in the range of 1/3 to 2/3 of their total standby waste eliminated. Not all of it, and nowhere near half of a total electric bill, but a real, specific number you can actually verify rather than take on faith. And that verification is worth doing rather than skipping, because it's what separates a habit you'll keep from one you'll quietly abandon in a month. If you've got a smart electric meter, most utilities now offer an app or web portal showing daily or even hourly usage. Check your overnight baseline, the hours when almost nothing in the house should be actively running, before you start using your switched strips. Then check that same overnight baseline again, 2 weeks after you've built the habit in. That overnight number is the cleanest read you'll get on standby power specifically, since it's largely isolated from the noise of daytime cooking, lighting, and appliance use that makes a full daily total harder to interpret. If you don't have smart meter access, the plug-in watt meter from Part 2 does the same job at the device level. Measure a device's standby draw before switching to the new habit. Confirm it reads 0 once the strip is off, and you've got your proof without needing a utility app at all. This is also the honest place to say clearly what this trick is not, the same way we've done with the physics of your solar and cooling builds on this channel. This will not cut your electric bill in half. It will not replace the need to actually manage your home's biggest energy users, heating, cooling, and water heating, which dwarf standby power in nearly every home and deserve their own separate attention if a bill genuinely feels too high. What this trick does, honestly and reliably, is eliminate a specific, well-documented, completely invisible category of waste that most households have never once thought to look for the cost of a power strip and a habit that takes about 2 weeks to become automatic. That honesty is really the whole reason this belongs on this channel. Instead of being another version of the secret device the power company doesn't want you to know about, video, that shows up in every algorithm's recommendations sooner or later. Those videos promise a dramatic number because dramatic numbers get clicks, and they wrap a real physical principle, reactive power, or in other cases, real standby waste, in a conspiracy that was never necessary in the first place. Standby power doesn't need a cover-up story to be worth fixing. It's sitting in plain sight, documented by government energy agencies in multiple countries, addressed directly in Japan's own efficiency regulations, and solvable with a $7 switch and about 20 minutes of your evening. The honest version was always going to be smaller than the sensational one. It's also the version that's still true 3 months from now when you actually look at your bill. That's the real reason this habit has lasted in ordinary Japanese households for decades, instead of fading out the way flashier claims tend to. It never promised more than it could deliver, so nobody ever felt let down by it. Just quietly kept working, one switch strip at a time, in millions of homes that never needed a dramatic story to justify flipping a switch on their way out of the room. Before you go, tell me in the comments what you found once you actually checked. Was it the game console, the cable box, something else entirely you didn't expect? And if you've already got a habit like this in your own home, whether it came from a Japanese household or somewhere else entirely, I'd love to hear how you do it. I read every comment, and those small, specific details are usually exactly what shapes the next build on this channel.